Folks, thank you so much for coming to the Webster Public Library for what we think will be an interesting presentation on a book called The Thinking Academy. The Thinking Academy subtopics are a school which embraces cognitive education across the curriculum. It's a proposal to redesign America's schools. And today, Dave Martin, Donna Lydham will do the major presentation. My job is to introduce folks. Major alternative to contemporary education is a major concern for all of us. This is a major alternative. And to reflect what the book is about, we have a little notation about the vision. And the vision is a school where administrators, teachers, and parents collaborate to promote the best in education for their students. Teachers are trained in both academic areas and in critical thinking strategies which foster effective learning. Assessment outcomes and academic achievement will be high for every student in the school. Students will qualify for post-secondary learning regardless of how their family and social background. And so we have a little introduction about our book. Looking at the book itself, this book emphasizes the role of the teacher, the student, and the role of the parent. The role of the teacher in promoting effective learning with their students, reinforced by the parent, providing our good teachers with the necessary skills, thinking skills, to become even better teachers. Contemporary education reform that is going on throughout the country today, and even in our state of Connecticut, emphasizes policies. And unfortunately, very little is trickling down into what's needed within the classroom. I would like to explain something about this particular program's background. The developer of this program is Professor Rouvain Forestier, who is the initiator and dreamer of this particular program. He is based in Jerusalem, Israel, and he is the founder of the Forestier Institute. A little additional background about this gentleman. Just before the creation of the State of Israel, he was called upon to develop a program to make human beings out of kids who were totally traumatized through the Holocaust. His work proved successful. What came after was the program has been used in many different formats and with incoming children from North Africa, the Middle East, Ethiopia, and the former Soviet republics. So the program has a viable base. Another point of information. This program has grown from just one geographical location to 70 different geographical locations in the world. And it's published, the program itself is published in 18 different languages. In addition, there are over 1,000 research studies which validate this particular program that it works. And we have several people here who will talk about the program in depth. Dr. David Martin, who has been a trainer for the Forrestein programs for many, many years, and Donna Lydham, who's been a teacher in the Hartford Public Schools and has utilized the program for many years. So, Dave, please take over.
Thanks very much, Irv, and I appreciate that very sound introduction. So the concept here is a school which has a foundation in the area of critical thinking, but with a very specific program. And so I'm going to use a PowerPoint to present to you how the program works, and also the whole business of some examples of what the exercises are that students would do. But in particular, I want to emphasize that this program is something that can be adopted or adapted by any school, public, private, parochial, or even in some cases in an after-school tutorial setting, if there is a commitment to the infusion and the integration of thinking skills. So we'll go through this, and I have some materials to hand out to you, which I think you're certainly very free to take with you, and maybe they will help to shed more light on this. This is a picture of the cover of the book, and there's a picture of myself and a fellow trainer. But I'd like to give you the context, and Irv talked about the fact that we have a particular moment in the history of American education where there's a great many different forms of reform, many of which, as Irv correctly said, are focused on policy rather than on the teacher and the classroom. And part of the background or the context is the development of what is known as the Common Core. And I'm sorry if I'm repeating anything that you already know, but just kind of a quick review. An important milestone was reached about 3 years ago in American education when an agreement was reached and agreed upon by about 45 of the 51 states, counting DC, that there was a common core of curriculum that students should be involved with and that schools would commit to, at least in the public sector. And that means that for every subject area, there were lists of very specified objectives. But there's one thing that is very seriously missing. And that is that although there is some mention of thinking skills, such as hypothesizing in science, which we would all agree is important for learning science, there is no common thread that is explicit or independent of these thinking skills, which then cut across all subject matter. Well, what's the consequence of that? Students can learn how to hypothesize in science, but what about hypothesizing about the plot or the intent of an author in literature? What about hypothesizing about the several causes of the American Civil War? So, in other words, thinking skills are embedded within the Common Core, but they're not an identifiable separate thread. This school, the Thinking Academy, makes these explicit as a parallel and related thread that goes along with the curriculum. And so that's the fundamental difference. It builds upon, it doesn't eliminate the Common Core. And so therefore, the rationale for doing this is that thinking skills need to be a part of the whole curriculum. Well, what do we mean by thinking skills? We mean things like learning to compare, to categorize, to analyze, to organize, to use logic, to use reasoning, and those things is very easy to imagine cut across every single subject area. But not only that, also it's pretty useful in life outside school, such as getting along with friends or with family, and then later on, of course, in the workplace. The point is, long after you've forgotten the dates of the Civil War, although I hope you wouldn't, at least you know something about what the causes and effects of war are and how to organize and analyze. Now, the other part of this particular slide says there's no curriculum change without teacher change. What does that mean? That means that in order to have an effective thinking academy, a school which is devoted to thinking strategies, there's a different way of teaching. And therefore, teacher development or professional development, if you prefer that, is a critically important part of implementing or setting up what we're calling a thinking academy. Now, the notion of a thinking school is not entirely new. In fact, in the UK, there is a small network of schools which have made a commitment to implementing thinking skills across the curriculum, although they've used different programs. So there are some similarities. Similarities are listed there in those 7 bullets. Planning is involved, the development of a thinking language in the school, so everyone in the school talks about those kinds of thinking words, categorizing, comparing, and so on. Use of a coordinator, and of course, the last one, use of metacognition, which is just another way of saying thinking about thinking. Now you'd say, well, now why is that important? Why is it important to think about thinking? Isn't it enough just to apply a thinking skill? And the answer is, well, we want our students ultimately to become independent of us as they grow up in the world. And that means that when they encounter a problem, they need to know what to do. And so if in the context of learning thinking strategies, there's a pause and say, well, how did you get that answer? Or what would have been another way to do that? That's thinking about thinking, so that when the student doesn't have us anymore and faces a difficult problem, the student can say, well, let's see, I could do it this way, or I could do it that way, and therefore they're on the way to becoming independent. So that's what metacognition is really about. But this model of a thinking school is also different in some ways from those that are used in other parts of the world. Of course, as Irv said, this uses a particular well-developed program as the focus of the thinking skills. And in the second phrase there's the word cognitive modifiability. And that's the central message. And that message is, it's never too late. In other words, anyone can be given an opportunity to learn how to learn better or to think better. It doesn't mean that I will necessarily be equal to the person on my left or the person on my right, but I can be better than I am right now. And that's a very positive and hopeful philosophy. And so cognitive modifiability is becoming more adept at the learning process. I'm deliberately avoiding the word increasing intelligence because that's been very badly misused. But if you say intelligence means your capacity for learning, then okay. Through certain strategies, we can make a difference in terms of a person's capacity for learning. I've already mentioned teacher development. There's another difference is we'd like parents to sign a contract where they agree as part of the school itself, as part of the Thinking Academy, to help reinforce the mental processes, not the subject matter, but the mental processes at home that are being exposed or taught within the school situation. And so therefore it becomes a partnership. Assessment is done at the school rather than somewhere else, and applications to the workplace and post-secondary education. So how do you start a thinking academy? Well, you certainly have to start by saying, is this school ready for making the leap toward establishing thinking as a central theme? And that has to include the school community, the administration, and the parents as well as the teachers. Those first three bullets, of course, describe some of the steps, but I want to talk about the fourth bullet. Teachers cognify their curriculum. That's an invented word. What that basically means is that teachers, having had the in-depth development and training here, take a look at their subject matter curriculum, whether it's science, social studies, literature, mathematics, whatever, and say, okay, what are the thinking skills that are hidden beneath that I want to then bring out and make conscious? And by bringing those out, then they become something that is a focus. And now, in a few minutes, I'll show you some examples of that from each of the four major subject areas as far as what we mean by cognifying the curriculum. Also, it says here that there are phases of the thinking process, and I have a handout that I'd like to give you, which you certainly are welcome to keep, and we'll go over it together. There are three sets of dashed lines there: input, elaboration, and output. And what do those things refer to in terms of the actual thinking skills? Well, the first stage, if you look at that list that you have in front of you, it says stage 1. And you can see that there are 7 different skills that are involved in the problem-solving process. And each of those together as a category has to do with collecting the information about whatever problem you want to solve. And so you shouldn't be starting on a solution until you've collected the data. How do we do that? Well, we do it with those 7 things that are on your sheet. I've only got 6 on the projection because there's some overlap. Using all your senses, having a plan, labeling, looking at time and space, organizing your sources of information, and of course, your last one in that first phase, being precise. Now, I just want to comment on the side that you'll see that I've spelled organizing with an S rather than a Z because this presentation was first given in South Africa and they use the British spelling and substitute S's for Z's. So please don't be thrown off by that. Well, once you've collected the data, then what do? Well, then we need to do something with it. We process it. And so you'll see that there's the next 10 things in that list, or stage, or phase 2, have all to do with processing the information in some way that's going to lead to a solution. And by the way, you can take this as a model and you can apply it to any problem-solving situation that you'd like to. Make a plan, keep all the data in mind, compare, make a hypothesis, and using logic and so on. So now we've collected the data, then we've processed it. Now what do? We go to stage 3, we express the solution. This is systematic. Now it says overcome egocentricity. That means being able to look at things from somebody else's point of view, not your own. And so if you use the example of the West Hartford Public Library, and we roll the clock back a few years where we're back at a time when there was no parking garage, and some of you will remember that. What was the problem? Well, the problem was simply that there were not enough spaces that were convenient for the patrons to be able to use the library. And so there were various solutions that could have been proposed to that. It could have been an underground garage. It could have been a remote parking lot with a shuttle bus coming back and forth. All of those things might have been considered. I was not here at the time, so I'm not sure. But we had to go through that, and then we came to stage 3. Now, what does it mean to overcome egocentricity in doing a parking garage for the West Hartford Public Library? It means that maybe the staff planned how the garage was going to look, but they had to plan it in a way that it was executed not from the point of view of the convenience of the staff, but from the point of view of the convenience of the patron. So that's an example of something that's non-academic, very much real life, that would illustrate the notion of overcoming your tendency to look at things only from your point of view. Taking your time, avoiding trial and error, and so on, are also part of expressing the solution. Let me pause and see if there's any questions so far before we go into some of the examples of the activities that students would do. Any questions that I can help anyone with?
Could you give an example how the actual subject matter in a typical class?
Yes, I will, and I'm glad you asked that because I'll give you a concrete example, and I'm going to pick one from the study of history as a for instance. So thank you. Yes?
What happens when you don't have a group of parents that is going to work along on this process? Is there a way of pulling them in?
That's an excellent question. The answer is that in order to make a decision about a school coming up with a commitment, that we find that doing a presentation for the teaching staff, separate from a presentation for parents, then gives the idea very clearly about what they can do to help and what they're perhaps buying into. Now, I would not suggest that if there's only perhaps a percentage of the parents willing to make the commitment, that would not prevent the school from becoming a thinking academy if the staff and administration are committed. Because sometimes once things get started, then the parents say, aha, I get it, and I'd like to come on board. But the answer to your question is a presentation with a chance to actually work through some of the exercises that the students do themselves. And we find that when we do that, they get hooked because we're all fascinated by mentally challenging tasks anyway. And so that is a way that has worked in the past to get them on board eventually, if not right away. Yes?
Well, I'm a teacher. And
okay.
You're throwing this out. You're telling me we're going to start a thinking academy at your school.
Yes.
How much time what's the process for this teacher to be able to understand everything you're telling me now over what period of time before I become a good teacher in terms of the thinking academy?
Okay. Donna, let me, yeah, go ahead.
I was trained in instrumental enrichment with Hartford schools and with the Yale New Haven University project. And basically, as a teacher, I was for high school exceptional special needs kids. And we had a 5-day intense workshop of 3 hours a day for 5 straight days. That was the initial getting into it. And then we had the follow-up once a month with the mentor and the coordinator, which was our monthly staff meetings, where we were looking at curriculum and developing a common core curriculum. And it was the first time in Hartford Public Schools where something that was coming together for special needs kids actually worked. The following year, again, we had a 5-day intensive professional development workshop. It was, 5 days, straight, for like 6 hours each of those days. And then during the course of the school year, we met once a month. In other words, taking the time of what schools have for professional development and teacher development and your workshops, by bringing the teacher through this, the core, then during the school year, you're looking at your content and saying, okay, how are we going to meet the content need and goals and objectives? Because we know this is where the child needs the thinking skills or the cognitive piece of being addressed so that they can grasp that. But they utilized the whole school year And we signed up for it, and we had like 90% participation of the teaching staff at the middle school, high school level back in 1985 in Hartford for the special needs students.
Thank you, Donna. I think part of what you're also asking is how to make time for this in the curriculum. And I'm going to come to that for sure, because that is, of course, always a concern. The short answer is it's infused, it's integrated, but I want to give a longer answer to that. So let me go ahead and we will come back to that. In any kind of thinking episode that's done in this program within the classroom, there are three things that one does. And the first of those is what we call mediation of a particular thinking task, whether it is something that involves comparing or categorizing or hypothesizing. Of course, those things are going to vary from day to day. And metacognition I've already described, to think about the thinking process you just did. And then thirdly, and this partly gets back to your question, is now making a connection to whatever the subject of today's lesson is, whether it's the Civil War or the formula for finding a particular answer in physics, or solving a particular problem in mathematics, or analyzing a particular piece of literature in the case of English. And part of the training that's involved is how to make those bridges, because of course that's critical. Thinking skills might be interesting in and of themselves, but they have to take you somewhere. And so you make it serve the curriculum. So that's part of what I'm talking about in terms of codify the curriculum, and some perhaps more concrete examples will help. Just a detail here. There are two versions of this program known as instrumental enrichment. One is designed for ages 3 to 9, and the other one is designed for ages 9 and up. And so there are various thinking themes that are involved in each of the two versions. And what I've put up here is a list of the different instruments, as they're called, for the program for the younger children. Each of those topics represents about 20 different activities. So this is at least a 2-year program if it's done on the basis of about 3 times a week, which is part of the answer to the earlier question. And I've got some examples to show you, but if you want to just take a quick look, you can see there's a variety of thinking skills that over a 2-year period the younger child has an experience with. You might want to particularly notice the last 3, which deal with feelings. That sometimes we have to use thinking skills to look at or examine our feelings. And that Feuerstein has a wonderful phrase, and he says that thinking and feeling are 2 sides of the same coin, and the coin is transparent. And I love that particular phrase, because of course that talks about the fact that these are 2 related, although sometimes separate kinds of activities. So let's take a look at some samples. This is a little hard to read from a distance, but this is 1 page from the particular instrument called Orientation in Space. And this is all about being able to learn position words. And so one of the activities here is, let's take a look at the man, and there's a blue dot in relation to the man's head. What word would we use to say the location of the blue dot in relation to the man's head? It would be above. So we're teaching the position word, or the preposition above. And of course we've got 3 flowers, and we would say where is the smallest flower from our point of view? It's on the left. So we've got left, middle, right, above, below, and this is just 1 page. And of course, in the context of the whole instrument, the students acquire, through a pictorial modality, a whole set of position words. This is not the first instrument in this particular program, but it is one of them. And here's another example. The task here is, well, it's called Compare and Discover the Absurd. And I wish I could blow this up further, but if you look carefully at the photograph or the drawing, you see that there is a small donkey pulling a heavy load uphill, and the wheels of the wagon are going at a great rate, and you probably can't see it from where you're sitting, but the little donkey is smiling and has a flower in his mouth. On the other hand, in the background is a huge donkey pulling a small load downhill, and he is struggling. So the first question is, well, what's going on here? And for the mediator, the teacher, there's a set of guide questions on the left, and so it's, how are we going to compare these two? Well, we've got size, direction, age, shape, weight, all those are criteria. So that's the first part of this, is how do they compare? The second thing is, what's wrong here? And how can we fix it? What's one simple thing that you could do to make this picture not absurd, not the problem with not making sense, but to have it make sense? And so again, there are 20 of these in the instrument called Compare and Discover the Absurd. By the way, students really get into this. A lot of discussion. They don't have to do any writing. This is, we're dealing with younger children here. One more example, and this has to do with the first of the three emotion instruments. You have a photograph of somebody expressing a feeling, and then you have two cartoons. Now, unfortunately, space prevented me from being able to give you the other two cartoons, but you need to know what they are. And then you have to do one task here, and that is make a match between the photograph and the drawing that is closest to what is being shown. So there's two missing drawings here. The third one that you can't see has a picture of someone opening a letter in a post office. And the fourth one is a person being surprised at a birthday party. Now you'll be able to do this. Well, you're probably going to eliminate the girl and the flower because it's pleasant, but it's not delight. And you probably would eliminate the one you can't see, which is the person in the post office. So what are you going to do? You've got this spaceship that's going to land, and then you've got the surprise birthday party. Now those are the hard ones. You have to eliminate one, and through a lot of discussion, students usually come to the point and say, well, boy, I'd love to see a spaceship land, but look at the gestures on the part of the people in the foreground. Again, you can't see it as much as the students would, but we've got the hands on the head. They're not too sure about how delightful this really is. On the other hand, the picture of a person being surprised by a birthday party and everybody saying, surprise, obviously is the better fit. And of course, the students need to explain why. Now, it's an easy bridge from here into literature. And you can imagine that we can make a connection between this and the plot line of a particular story. The same kind of analysis goes on. So this is a good example of how solving a task through mediation and discussion, then thinking about the thinking process, how can we make sure we are eliminating right, and then say, okay, now where is this going to help me in understanding the story that we're doing today in literature? So those are just three samples from the younger program. And similarly, the older program for age 9 up through adult has 14 different themes. Again, each one representing about 20 different activities. So this one is a 3-year program spread over 3 school years at least, and sometimes more. Again, I've got some samples to show you of those which will just give you a feel for it. I'll give you a minute just to read that list. It's very comprehensive. This is what you call a very thorough thinking program. Well, here's the first instrument in this older program. It's called organization. What are you supposed to do here, do you think? What's the task?
Well, it's a diverse picture, and you want to organize it so it's not all over the map.
Okay, all right, fine. What do you think I am going to specifically look for in each of the frames that doesn't have a model?
Commonality.
Yeah. You're going to
look for the dots that best match the frame.
That's right. In other words, we've set up ourselves in the very first frame, in the first row. We've got a model. We've got two squares. And what about that triangle? What's the relationship between that triangle and the square? Is that triangle half of that square or not? It isn't, okay? Now, in some of the other pages it is, which makes it harder. So that means that for each of the other frames, I've got to find two squares and that particular triangle. Any old triangle will not do. And by the way, you're not allowed to turn the paper or turn your head. You have to do it in your mind. Okay? And so this is all about organizing visually. Well, what's the whole business about an application to that? If I'm learning how to solve a math problem, I have to, in a sense, connect the dots. I have to collect the evidence from what's given, and I have to project a possible route to the solution. Quite challenging, and very much of an individual kind of thing. This is completely different. This has something that's similar to the two donkeys going up and down that hill. But this one, again, in order to do this one, which is designed, of course, for older children, I need to tell you the two missing frames because there was not room for all four. The third frame is the picture of the suitcase on the scale, and the needle on the scale has moved way around to about 110. And the fourth picture that you don't see is this young man putting the suitcase on his shoulder and dragging it very forlorn and sadly away from the scale. So what's gone on here? What's really going on? A little bit of psychology going on here. It starts out, suitcase is just going along swimmingly. He only is needing to use one finger to balance it. And he very happily puts it on the scale. In the third frame, that you can't see, the scale reads 110. Now, in the last frame, he's dragging sadly away with the suitcase in tow. So what has happened here?
Progressions.
There's definitely been a progression. There's been a sequence. What's happened in his mind?
But it's something occurring about weight.
That's right, okay. Has the suitcase changed?
No.
No, okay. What changed?
What's inside the suitcase?
No, not really,
It changed.
because it's the same suitcase. Okay, I really apologize that I don't have the third and fourth cartoons, but they all are in a sequence, and the suitcase that's on the scale in the missing third frame is the same suitcase as he put initially onto the scale. So what has changed?
The strength of the man carrying the suitcase.
Okay, you're on the right track. Something's changed in his mind, okay? And oftentimes we talk about the phrase, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, okay? The only thing that's changed is his knowledge. But that has affected his attitude and the way he behaves at the end. So anyway, this is an example of one of the pages of one of the instruments dealing with the absurd, but also what's going on here psychologically. The next one has to do with categorizing, very different. And you can't see it clearly from where you are, but part of the sample of this page has to do with grouping the words according to particular categories and labeling the categories. How useful is that? Very useful in lots of fields. And then one of the final activity in this particular program has to do with looking at patterns in a very special way. And when the session is over, I've got some samples of that you might enjoy looking at. This is a representation of two-dimensional stencils. It would be real easy if you had the real stencils, but these are some pictures of some stencils, and the task that students work in groups with has to do with looking at a composite of two or more of these that are laid on top of each other. And your task, and if you'd like to pass that around, that would be fine, and we can pass another one from the other side. You can see that in each case they are comprised of individual stencils that have been laid on top of one another and to a particular pattern, and what we have to do is figure out what sequence and which individual ones. It's very challenging, and that's why it's the last activity in the program. So that's, again, a sample of the activities in the second or the older program. I'd like to turn now to what I meant by cognify the curriculum. And I pulled examples together from the four major subject areas: language, math, science, and social studies. On the left-hand column here from language are a set of skills that you'll find in most curricula for language arts, including the Common Core curriculum. And this is, of course, only part of it. And so the question is, well, what activities in the thinking skills program will help me to do those things that are on the left? And what this shows is that there are specific instruments on the right-hand column under Feuerstein Instrumental Enrichment, or FIE for short, which directly play into the whole set of skills that are part of the regular curriculum. So this is what I meant by cognifying the curriculum, looking into the subject matter and teasing out what are the explicit thinking skills that we can teach, so that in order to achieve better the objectives of the curriculum, then we can practice and explore these activities themselves. And so that's an example from the language field. This is from mathematics. And you can, again, see that there's things that are typically in the skill set for mathematics, and some activities on the right-hand side that are dealt with in the particular program. Same with social studies, and same with science. And in response to your earlier question about an example, I thought I would go back to social studies for a moment and talk about that. Let's say that I am a teacher whose curriculum has to do with a deeper understanding of the American Civil War. I know I brought that up a moment ago, but I think it's an easy example. So I decide that today's focus is going to be on the theme of differences in viewpoint of the North versus the South. So I begin my lesson with an activity that involves comparing. And I compare groups of pictures, or I compare groups of words, or groups of designs. So I focus temporarily on the comparison process itself. And I use things like similar, same, different, and I look at different attributes such as size, distance, age, weight, and so on. So I practice comparison for its own sake. Then I do a little metacognition and I say, okay, when you help your mind become a good comparer, what do you tell your mind to do? And that's metacognition. I'll give you an example of what a 15-year-old gave me once a time when I asked that question after doing these. And he said, and this is almost a direct quote, when I have to compare two things, in my mind I make two lists. And the lists are all the things that are true about the first thing and all the things that are true about the second thing. Then in my mind I cross out all the things that are the same in both columns. And what I'm left with is how they are different. That is metacognition. Okay, now it's time to come back to the Civil War. I say, okay, now, there were two different viewpoints in the North versus the South in 1861. How can you go about the same comparison process looking at the differences and the similarities between the North and the South point of view? And so I would list the characteristics, and I would look at what's the same and what's different, and therefore I am back into bridging into my subject matter of today, but I've used the comparisons process as a tool to help me be a better thinking about the subject itself. So that's an example of what I would give you to answer that question. One of the next questions is, well, okay, how do you know if there are any effects of this approach to helping students to become better thinkers? And what are the effects on their achievement, which is, of course, the bottom line? And so we use a variety of things, looking at scores on standardized tests and narrative responses, thinking habit observation scales, standardized measures of reasoning. And one of the more interesting things is, tell me how your thinking has changed. And I love doing that one because at the end of a year using the program, it's very insightful to see what students say about themselves. And if a teacher has faithfully implemented thinking skills across the curriculum, you'll get things like, well, I now slow down before I jump into trying to solve a problem. Or now I can think of more than one solution to the same problem. Or now I can work with someone else to help brainstorm a solution to a problem. And of course, when we assess teachers, there are a variety of techniques that I won't go into now. But let's talk about what the research has found. Irv referred to the fact there's more than 1,000 research studies done on this program. What have these things shown? First thing, academic achievement, and specifically math and language arts. There's very definite, clear, significant differences in student achievement in the academic areas, or what we perhaps might call basic skills. But it's more than that. Improved school attendance. A number of these studies have looked at that, and how important is that? You've got to get kids in school in order to have effects with them. And along with that, the third thing is some improved school behavior. That's an interesting one, because how would becoming a more effective thinker affect your behavior? And the fact of the matter is that once people start looking at their own process, they become more self-aware. So it's understood that that would be something you would find out. Students, of course, begin to understand that thinking strategies are underneath these subject areas, and they develop better thinking habits, and studies have shown that these are some of the things that they improve in as far as thinking habits are concerned. But then there's also a category that's beyond the one I just mentioned, because those were general effects found across the board. But there are some specific applications of the program to special needs students. Right here in West Hartford, is an example of a kind of thinking academy that's been going on for a good many years. The Ben Bronze Academy, which is a private school devoted to improving the achievement of seriously learning disabled students in the middle school range. And you have a summary here of what the research with that program has shown over 16 years of implementing the program. These students, very challenging. Improvement in reasoning, analysis, synthesis, oral language, concept formation, short-term memory, and self-confidence. Now, Donna has worked with the program with special needs students, and you want to say a word about some of the other effects you've seen with students who have special needs and this program itself?
Basically, I had a student that was referred to my summer school vocational program. This was 20 years ago. And the family, although they lived in Hartford, their son was going to the Ben Bronze Academy. So I went to the Ben Bronze Academy, spoke with the staff, spoke with them, and including their son, about what I had available in the sense of a summer school vocational work program. What was interesting is that because I was an instrumental enrichment teacher, I was able to incorporate his work experience with what Ben Bronze Academy was giving him in the sense of academic content. He was very much interested in pursuing computer science and technology. And I convinced our IT team that they needed to take him on and put him under their wing. And he stayed with us for 2 years, and he did pursue a career in IT. Again, it was because of knowing this whole process that I was able to bridge it into the vocational experience. I'm retired now, but I'm working in a private school, and I'm working with a young man who has special needs. He's a high school student, but he hasn't a clue as to cause and effect. And I'm using dots with him to get him to look at his behavior himself. And before we broke for the Christmas break, we had one of those Kodak moments, because the director of the school was trying to get him to see his goals and his attendance, and he just could not see how his lack of attendance was preventing him from achieving those goals, until we looked at dots and organization and how certain things just had to follow a certain plan. And we talked about him wanting to go to the Police Explorers. Police Explorers were adamant that his attendance had to improve, and yet in his mind, he couldn't see why he couldn't break out of his ghetto mold. And finally, we were able to use dots, his attendance, the director's conversation with him, with the police, and he kind of got the idea that the attendance prevented this dream of the Police Explorers, and the whole cause and effect realm was in using dots and also numerical progression. But I had those two instruments that I was using with him, and this took about 6 weeks. So, I mean, that's right now where I'm at with using the instruments.
Thanks very much. And I know you've got lots of other examples that if we had time you could give from all of your many years of experiences in Hartford Public Schools using the program too. So thanks very much.
David,
yes.
I'd like to add one
Yes,
additional
please.
point.
Mm-hmm.
Besides the Ben Bronze Academy, which has been very effective in working with youngsters who have severe learning disabilities from the greater Hartford area and other areas of the state of Connecticut, there is another school that has shown tremendous promise over the years, 40-year period. It's been institutionalized in that school, the Lexington School for the Deaf in New York City and Manhattan. And that is one of our prime examples where this, for 40 some odd years, students going to the school have been trained by excellent teachers who've been trained in the Forresty methodology. I would like to also introduce a colleague of ours, Edwin Vargas, who is the representative, state representative from South End of Hartford, and perhaps he'd like to add a few things because he has been trained in the FIE program.
Thank you, Irv. I just would like to say I've been a teacher myself 35 years in the Hartford Public Schools. My wife and I both taught. In my last 5 years, when I was a teacher at the adult school, about 10 or 11 years ago, I started working with Irv on the FIA as a volunteer, trying to help him set up meetings with policy leaders and educators and parents and other groups that were interested in improving their kids' educational achievement. And I was very interested in this program, and I went through the training with Dr. Martin, and we've been through this now for over 10 years, working, trying to interest people, because to me it makes eminent sense that before you can teach academics, kids have to have clear thinking skills. That's a precondition for learning. And most of the time we think that this happens naturally. And maybe it does in a functional middle-class family where you have adults that model clear thinking for their kids. But it doesn't happen in many cases. Dr. Feuerstein, for example, had to deal with a population of kids that had survived the Holocaust that really were in horrendous condition. When they got to Israel, the Israeli school systems didn't know how to deal with these kids. And they thought they were mentally defective, that they were retarded. Dr. Feuerstein was a pioneer in the thinking that intelligence is not fixed. When I grew up, that was the thinking, that you had an IQ, you were born with a certain IQ, and that didn't vary throughout your life. But Dr. Feuerstein believed in the modifiability of intelligence, that intelligence could be modified. And by using a control group of kids that were successful, together with the kids, with the Holocaust survivors, he noticed that there were certain strategies being used by the so-called normal kids that were missing in the kids that had grown up under those horrendous circumstances of those prison camps. So what he did, he developed a battery of exercises that would strengthen those 14 skills he had identified in the successful students. And those 14 areas, which includes the dots, includes comparisons, includes all those different strategies that we use to try to organize chaos into something that makes sense to us. You know, because when you look at the dots, it's no different than looking at the constellations in the skies. Those constellations are not really there. They were organized by astronomers and astrologists in the old days to basically make sense of the night sky. But there is no gladiator, there's no bull, there's no Great Dipper, Little Dipper. Those are just formulations that we projected to make sense out of the night sky. Well, in a normal middle-class family, for example, I like to give this example. A kid might be listening to the father and the mother discuss a new refrigerator. The mother says, well, the father may say, well, you bought the one that costs $50 more. It says, yes, but this one has an ice maker, and it costs less to operate, it's energy efficient. Now the kid that's listening says, oh, well, it's not only price. There's also other issues that are involved in the purchase of this refrigerator. For example, the fact that it has an extra feature, the fact that it's cheaper to operate. So these are things that are being modeled without the parents realizing that they're modeling clear thinking for their kids. But now when you deal with the kids that I had to deal with and that you had to deal with, many of you had to deal with in the Hartford school systems, we're dealing with a population of inner city kids that many of them come from dysfunctional families, if there's a family at all. And sometimes there's not a responsible adult that's really modeling clear thinking. Sometimes they're modeling thinking that is erroneous thinking for the kids. And that's the modeling they're getting. So the battery of, I took training with Dr. Martin on the battery of the 14 instruments that were used to bone up on those. And I found that even as an adult, some of them were very easy for me, and some of them were more difficult, which shows that even as an adult, we can learn a lot, because we tend to rely on those thinking skills that we're good at. And we develop those. And the ones we're not as good at, we tend not to rely on as much. So I found that it was helpful even to me as an adult. But I used it with some of my adult students. The last 5 years I was the head teacher at the adult school. And I used it with some of the students, dealt with immigrant students from all over the world. And I found that it really helped them in many, many different ways. So I become a real advocate of Feuerstein instrumental enrichment. And by the way, I like to say this, that in Israel, to be part of the Israeli Air Force, every pilot has to go through Feuerstein training. You cannot be a pilot without going through this training. So Feuerstein found interesting things. For example, on the issue of comparisons, he found that kids made comparisons on the basis of proximity if they didn't think clearly. For example, if you showed a smoking pipe and let's say a chimney, a fireplace with a chimney, and a book of matches, and you asked the kid, what's closest to a smoking pipe, the chimney or the book of matches? Kids would say the book of matches. Invariably, they associated the matches with lighting the pipe. Now, when you really think about it, the bowl where you burn the tobacco in a pipe is like a small miniature fireplace. The stem where you draw the smoke out is like a miniature chimney. So, but that thinking is a more sophisticated thinking to really look at those comparisons. It's not something that is readily natural. You have to have that introspective cognitive skills and metacognition, which I like to define metacognition as a second brain that we develop that monitors the quality of our own thinking. So when we can actually watch our thinking process as if we were almost separate from it and say, am I really taking into account all the facts? Am I really making a true comparison here? Am I not? That second thinking that's taking place monitoring the first thinking is like a supervisory thinking. That is your metacognitive skill. Now, that's even more sophisticated than just developing the cognitive skills. But when you get to that point, then you really are an effective thinker, and I believe a more effective learner. So, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much, Ed, and I really like your analogy of the supervisor brain because that really is what we're doing. We're monitoring our thinking process, and so it's another layer. So thank you very much for a number of insights in there from both your own experience and from others. So thank you very much.
When the child graduates
yes, I'm sorry.
from high school,
Yes.
let's say the child has been going through this since the small grades, have they done any comparison of the child that went through this and the child that went to a regular school which didn't have this in their curriculum?
Yes, excellent question. The answer is absolutely yes. Among those more than 1,000 research studies, there are a number of controlled studies where they compared those who had versus those who had not. One of the more interesting studies took place actually in Israel, where they divided a group of about 80 different high school students into two groups, and they were equivalent in both cases. And the half of the group, the 40 or so, that was called Group A, had the regular curriculum for the last 2 years of high school plus remedial reading. Group B had the regular curriculum and instrumental enrichment. Both groups of 40 kids were considered to have some additional needs in the area of reading. But Group B actually had less remedial reading than Group A. And so they were tested at the beginning of their junior year, and it was proven to be equivalent. and they were tested at the end of senior year, 2 years later. Group B was already a little ahead in terms of achievement in reading, even though they had had less so-called remedial reading, because they had had the thinking process focus in those 2 years. But then something else even equally interesting happened, and that is in Israel, it's an educational researcher's dream come true, because there is compulsory military service for both men and women. And so they were able to then follow all of these students during their first 2 years in the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF.
Tammy Rush-Fishbane, please come to the adult circulation desk. Tammy Rush-Fishbane, thank you.
And interestingly, what happened is in that second period of 2 years, where there had been no intervention of either instrumental enrichment or remedial reading, Group B was much further ahead of Group A. And how could that be true? And the answer is that Group B had learned how to learn. And so therefore, that learning how to learn better, that building up a repertoire of strategies, continued to move and to help them in those intervening second period of 2 years, whereas Group A stayed pretty much the same. So there's other examples, but that's a good example of a controlled study that was done under very careful circumstances.
And I'd like to add, because I forgot to mention this, but after Dr. Feuerstein applied the strategies that he learned from the so-called normal students to the Holocaust survivors, some of those kids went on to great careers, and some of them even became what we would consider a genius from having been almost discarded as being mentally defective.
In Westport, Connecticut, the parents contacted Dr. Martin and Irv concerning their students, middle-class population, but they wanted their high school seniors to do better on the SATs. And it was a core group of parents that came together and met on Saturdays, and they, as parents, went through these instruments, and this is where I got reconnected, and I was working with, at these workshops with these parents, and these parents saw, and Dave can be more specific about the test scores going up, but this was a group of parents that went through the training so that they could help their own sons and daughters with developing strategies so that the SAT scores would improve.
That's a good example of parent involvement. Yes, yes, sir.
I just want to mention that in several, there are 2 geographical areas where literally hundreds of students went through compare and contrast. One is Northern Ireland, and the other is South Africa. And in both areas, they found that the Feuerstein methodologies worked far more effectively than in the traditional approach to education. So there is some very, very definite results. Unfortunately, one of our problems is to convince the policymakers that the program has been extremely effective and frankly should be used in many of our city schools, but all our schools.
Dr. Martin?
Yeah, yes.
I'm from Bloomfield, and
Yes.
and I think they're working now on Common Core standards.
That's right.
So
That's
therefore,
right.
this whole Thinking Academy option
Yeah.
seems to be probably beneficial in order to that area. But can you explain to me the relationship with what's going on? They're changing the teaching, the
Yeah.
Common Core, and how the Thinking Academy impacts that whole process.
Absolutely. The focus on the Common Core, of course, is looking at curriculum and how it's organized and so on. But you can take that process and build it together with a focus on thinking skills, which then allows the teachers to be able to identify what are the cognitive strategies or thinking skills that are underneath the subject matter curriculum. And if there's the training that goes along with that, helps the teachers to not only work on the subject matter, but also at the processes that are underneath it, then long after the students have forgotten the subject matter facts, they are still able to use and to make effective use of a set of mental processes that go beyond the subject matter. The ideal way to do it is to have training in a program like instrumental enrichment happen parallel with the focus on the Common Core, because they're not in contrast or contradiction with each other, but they can go together.
The supplemental.
Exactly.
What happens if a school doesn't incorporate thinking? They're just going to be back in stage one.
That's
by
right.
Changing what they're talking about, the curriculum, but not enabling the students to be better in the long run.
You've said it correctly yourself.
Good.
Yeah. So subject matter focus, fine, but subject matter alone is just not enough. Yeah. I'm going to just finish the PowerPoint, and then we can take a few minutes for further questions before we close off at 3 o'clock. I've put in here some of the teacher benefits that happen with regard to the training, and this is the results of the teachers going through the training. And I just put out some examples of some of the teacher workshops. Ed, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So this is an example of some of the trainings that are going on. As you can see, the faculty or staff development is very intense. That's a teacher who is being trained, and one of the things we do in the training is give them the responsibility of developing their own thinking lessons and teaching the group. This is another group, separate training workshops that took place actually in Newark, New Jersey. And you can see, again, there's a real intensity going on there. This is a slide showing some of the materials that teachers make use of during the training. This is a workshop in progress at a different time. That happens to be from Westport, Connecticut. And half of those people are parents and half are teachers, as Donna correctly pointed out. And these are some of the results that we've done in the research that shows the benefits to parents. So to summarize, obviously a school-wide commitment is necessary. Professional development is the key. Infusion of thinking strategies across the curriculum. And that means that especially focusing on the thinking activities several times a week, but then in the context of other subject matter, referring back to or focusing on some thinking strategies that may not be part of the actual exercises of the instrumental enrichment program is a very good marriage. And then, of course, the role of an on-site coordinator helping the teachers to implement, to answer questions, to model, and to even demonstration teach. Now, there's a whole separate problem we don't have time to get into, and that is, well, this is fine for teachers who are already in service. What about new teachers? And that answer has to do with doing something at the university level with teachers who are preparing to become teachers, but that's a topic for another day. Of course, we've mentioned that this new book that you have copies of there is The Thinking Academy. It just came out a month ago, and these are Irv and I are co-authors. And this tells about the book itself, which you can take a look at if you'd like. And I've put the website of the training center that we work with. And if you want to make a note of that, it's ictaweb.org, ictaweb.org. And you might just want to open that up and root around on there, because it's a website devoted to thinking strategies and schools. I'll just conclude by saying the quotation of one of supposedly Confucius saying, and we think that he said this. He said, "Give me a fish and I'll eat today, but teach me how to fish and I'll eat for a lifetime." And that's really what this is all about, is learning the how to rather than the thing itself. And I think that that probably summarizes things as well as anything else could possibly do. So I'll stop at this point. We have about 5 minutes for any other questions or discussion, and I would welcome any thoughts that you might have.
How many school systems have you approached with this concept and have picked it up and using it within their own school system?
Okay, that's a complicated question, and the answer, we have, in terms of presenting the idea, I would say probably close to a dozen school systems. It's a big commitment to ask. At this point, there is not yet any school that has said, we want to do this and go whole hog. However, there are a couple of school systems which say, well, we want to do it gradually. And so we'll start by training a few teachers, and then if all goes well, we'll build and gradually expand. As opposed to all of a sudden saying, we're going to do this school-wide all of a piece. And either way is okay. The second way is, of course, slower, but it might result, I'm pretty sure, in a much more deep commitment because it's moved in at a slower pace. So, yeah, yes?
This whole concept goes back how many years with Israel? 20 years ago?
50 years, more than 50 years. Yeah.
Between 50 and 60 years.
Okay, therefore, it's just coming into play right here in our Connecticut backyard, or?
No, because
You did it 15 years ago.
I did it in 1985, but
That's 28 years ago.
Yeah.
right, and there is also in the Midwest another center. The thing is that if you pay attention to educational funding, and when it comes to the grants, things get cyclical. But right now, the grant money is not there. When in 1985, when Dr. Feuerstein came to the United States, there was a grant, and Yale New Haven was conducting the study. Then the whole project moved south down to Florida. There have been other states that have gotten involved. It was once called Leslie College. It's now Leslie University. The educational director that I'm working with at this private school, she was, Feuerstein was part of her teaching core program for her doctorate back then. So it's been here, but now what I want to say is that the ownership of it needs really to be by the ranking members of the teachers, and probably if you looked at thanks to someone who saw the Hartford Current's picture of the experts walking out the door and the apple and that whole cartoon. And basically what I'm trying to say is that this whole thing with the educational process is really, it's the teachers kept saying, we're doing reading. And we were making those connections, you made us stop. And a lot of it is because of who we've got in charge at the helm. They really don't understand education. And we need to bring it back to this. But unfortunately, it's going to be teachers uniting and saying, enough is enough. This is what we need. We know what we need, and you need to listen to us.
Did Wilkie College teach this?
The university? I don't know, because it's part of Cambridge.
Yeah. They were, for a good long while, incorporating it into their teacher training program. I'm actually not sure about the present time, because sometimes this is person dependent, so when a person that was committed may retire, they may or may not continue something, unfortunately. That's an excellent question, and one of the issues is, well, where do you start? Do you start with the top level of administration and work down, or do you start bottom up? And I think the answer is both. Because you can't get an innovation started only from the bottom up. But if it's only top down, then that means teachers are dragged kicking and screaming. And so the most effective ones have been administrators and teachers together making a commitment. It's a tough sell for obvious reasons.
I think it needs to be taught when the teachers are students at a college.
I agree with you.
Because they get it there and they have the nucleus of it,
Right.
and they know how to teach to it. So when they get out of school, that it's not a big
Right.
deal for them to incorporate it. And they can incorporate it in little pieces. Nobody will know if the administration doesn't know about it.
Well, that's an interesting strategy, and I believe you're right. And that's why I mentioned the whole business of working with future teachers is a whole separate thing that has to do with working with universities. I'm trying to do that right now with one particular university as a start. So, yeah, both of your points are well made. Good time for one more question, and so anything further?
You know, unfortunately, we live in a society where the people who think they know all about education refuse, in many instances, to listen to what would be in their best interest. And unfortunately, lots of money is being spent and wasted before the fact is that every single school can use this type of program, and it will positively affect every single youngster. And giving the right tools, teachers, in terms of the forestry methodologies, wonders could be done when each and every school. That's our biggest problem, willingness to listen, and there's 101 factors that are basically political, and that is a major problem. We also have
Yeah, Donna's handing that out
Right.
now. These are some folders,
some
supplemental
additional
material.
information
Yeah,
that you may wish to pass on.
We're working that
yeah,
together.
That's okay.
Okay.
yeah.
You might want to pass it on if you know, keep yours and
Yeah, we've got extras, so.
here you go.
We have
do
extras.
have extras.
We have extras, so that's
Yeah,
okay.
why don't you take one of these? These are supplemental, more details.
Bring it to the superintendent of schools tomorrow.
All right. You're in
Yeah.
Bloomfield?
He won't be in.
He was in Hartford.
Superintendent, he knows me personally. You know, I.
Thank you very much for
Yes,
coming,
yes, he
and
did.
I was
we'll
reading.
hang around because we're going to do another presentation at 3:30, so